For this unit's presentations, we're taking off the training wheels and letting you sort of roam free. We're also trying to lighten the homework burden in a unit where we need to get through a lot of works. So basically, we're going to hope you can do some of each other's homework. You will take responsibility for 2 works from this unit, and that means you'll make 2 separate presentations, each on the day we're studying that art historical movement. Your opening slide should give the basic identifiers, but you don't need to offer an extended analysis of our big 4, content, function, context, and form. Instead, we want you to come up with your own big 4. Tell us 4 things that interest you, even puzzle you, about your work, the artist who created it, and or the era in which he or she was creating. If you can find information that's not in the textbook reading, and if you can focus in on some of the College Board's favorite themes, all the better. But you get to choose what you find worth emphasizing. You will then lead a discussion that compares this work to another from an earlier unit, your choice. Put the 2 works up on a slide side by side, but don't show your own points of comparison at first. Instead, see what your fellow students come up with and try to get them to come up with new ideas. Ask questions that will get them thinking and talking. Then, when the discussion is done, or Ms. Jacobs gongs you, show 1 or more final slides that make at least 3 comparative points about the 2 works. As always, we'd encourage you to find both similarities and differences, but it's your choice. Since this is a new approach, I'm going to model it for you in this podcast. The work I've chosen isn't required by the College Board, and I actually didn't assign any homework on it. It is on the McConnell-Jacobs list, and therefore it's in your book. So here's the work with the basic identifiers. It's Marc Chagall's White Crucifixion, painted in 1938 after Hitler had thoroughly consolidated power in Germany and had begun his campaign of genocide against the Jews. Since we haven't yet started racking up this unit's all too many isms, let me briefly explain this term surrealism. We'll spend more time there soon. It is an artistic movement that was heavily influenced by the writings of Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung. Freud believed that we reveal truths about our inner psyche in dreams that liberate our unconscious, basically show what's really on our minds. Usually when it's Freud, it's sex. Jung took this a step further and argued that we have a kind of collective unconscious of shared memories, beliefs, fears, and hopes, and these show up not only in dreams, but in literary and artistic archetypes. And he saw this as an explanation for why world religions or cultures that had very little contact or no contact had such similar religious imagery. Marc Chagall grew up in the Jewish ghetto of Lithuania and later emigrated to Paris. His dreamscapes include the Bible stories and folk tales of his Jewish religious childhood and also his own rather strange visions. Do you recognize the image on the left? It's the Fiddler on the Roof, a legendary figure who gave his name to the musical by that name and who appears in a lot of Chagall paintings. So, interesting point number 1, this is Pope Francis's favorite painting. When the Pope made this statement to a reporter, a lot of people were shocked. This is not a Catholic work. The painter is Jewish. The Christ he portrays is Jewish. He's bearded, his head is covered, and his loincloth is actually a Jewish prayer shawl. For that matter, when the painting was first unveiled in 1938, it shocked a lot of Jewish viewers. Weren't the Jews already being accused of encouraging the crucifixion? Wasn't the cross a club that was used to attack Jews? Keep in mind that this is 1938. Hitler has just taken his anti-Jewish rhetoric to a whole new level of violence with an event known as Kristallnacht, or the Night of Breaking Glass, a night of brutal, orchestrated attacks against German Jews. In fact, it was this event that inspired Chagall to paint the White Crucifixion. Political activists disliked the painting too. Where are the good guys? That is, where are our good guys? On the left, we see communist soldiers storming a Jewish shtetl or village. On the right, we see Nazis desecrating a synagogue. Now, from the perspective of the 21st century, it's not actually that hard to see both the Nazis and the communists as oppressors. This, remember, is Stalin's Russia. But in 1938, most intellectuals, and that means most artists, thought one had to choose one or the other of these alleged saviors of Europe. So I'm going to share one Christian literature professor's thoughts about why the Pope so loves this painting. This comes from an article he wrote for First Things magazine. This fellow is a literature professor at Baylor University. And he writes, Quote, I do not presume to put words into the mouth of the Bishop of Rome or to claim to have access to his thoughts. I do want to propose that his declared affection for Chagall's juxtaposition, note that word, of the Jewish people as the suffering servant and Jesus as the crucified Redeemer suggests a deep identification with the suffering of the Jews, which the Pope perhaps includes in his contemplation of the cross. It also invites reflection on the time in which we live, in particular on the fate of those who are daily being martyred around the world. So, for example, ISIS terrorists have beheaded and crucified Christians in Syria, Iraq, and Libya, and burned churches across the Middle East. These are actual news footage. Point 2, the painting juxtaposes Christian and Jewish iconography. Now, no symbol is more iconic for Christians than the cross. And here you note it's shown bathed in light with figures that hover over Christ's suffering body, the way angels in Christian paintings tend to hover over Jesus or Mary or the saints. But in this painting, the fellows with the long white beards are not archangels. They're rabbis or maybe the biblical patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and the matriarch Rachel. We associate the candelabrum with Hanukkah. This one only has 6 candles and one is snuffed out. The figure in green may be the traditional figure of the wandering Jew. Remember that Chagall himself wandered from Russia to America, to France, to America, returning to Europe only after World War II. The figure may also be the prophet Elijah, or he may be both. In his autobiography, Chagall recalls celebrating the festival of Passover as a child, where you opened the door for Elijah as part of the traditional meal. And he remembers wondering if Elijah came, and I quote, in the guise of a wretched old man, a hunchbacked beggar with a pack on his back and a stick in his hand. The latter recalls traditional paintings of the deposition, but it could also recall Jacob's ladder. Now, one commentator I read noted that the arrangement here with small related episodes arranged around a central figure recalls the icon paintings, which Chagall grew up surrounded by in Russia. Might also recall our Hyde painting or the catacombs, as you saw that on your most recent test. Note how the viewer's eye is invited to circle around the perimeter of the picture, meditating on the scenes one by one. Point 3, this Jewish artist used Jewish and Christian scriptures to describe his own artistic calling. Now, Chagall was not a Christian. He was raised an Orthodox Hasidic Jew, and although he didn't regularly attend a synagogue, he did study the Torah, pictured here, by the way, next to the cross. So this is a painting. This is another crucifixion that Chagall painted. And here he is much more clearly intermingled Jewish and Christian iconography. He painted this work in exile when the Guggenheims arranged for his escape to America. Now, it's certainly easy to understand how in 1942, in the midst of World War II, with millions of Jews being herded into concentration camps, that Chagall struggled to find enough meaning in life to paint, which you see here as a poem that he wrote to express his despair. I run upstairs to my dry brushes and am crucified like Christ, fixed with nails to the easel. And finally, point 4, Marc Chagall, in the end, tried to bring light to a troubled world. Now, I'm really just looking for an excuse to show you these. I love his stained glass windows. They don't appear in the course, but they're among my own personal favorite works of art. So Chagall worked throughout most of the 20th century, and many of his most famous works were inspired by the Bible. In addition to paintings, he worked in stained glass, and here are a couple of examples. So after World War II, he designed stained glass for bombed-out Christian cathedrals, for the new United Nations headquarters in New York, and for a hospital in Jerusalem. This one here had the theme, the 12 tribes of Israel. In all of them, we see him united in Jewish and Christian imagery, perhaps appropriately at the end of the war in a plea for peace. So here are my 2 comparative works. What's the one on the right? Remember our old friend, the Isenheim altarpiece? Now, if there's time, I'd like you to stop and think about what points of comparison you might see between those works. Well, I've gone on too long, so I'm going to hit 3 comparative points quickly, again, to model what we're looking for. So, Both works portray suffering unflinchingly. This is not the triumphal Christ of early Christian and Byzantine art, but a Christ suffering profoundly. The Rotem Pietà would be another example of that. Both artists incorporate the fantastical. Isenheim painted about 4 centuries before Freud, but there is a dream or nightmare-like quality in the Temptation of St. Anthony that is one of the altarpiece images, and think of the works of Hieronymus Bosch. But the style of the works differs fairly dramatically. Isenheim's altarpiece exhibits the characteristics of the Northern Renaissance: careful modeling, dark, deep color. Chagall, on the other hand, is painting in the post-photography modernist world that we are about to enter. So we see flat surfaces that don't attempt to disguise that they are painted. We see bright, often unnatural colors. We see confusion about time and space. These are not linear paintings, nor do they refer us automatically to a point in space, as Renaissance paintings tended to do. Instead, they use bright but often unnatural colors, distorted scale, and uncertain grounding. So I did not mean to be so long-winded. I never do. But I hope this gives you some idea of what we're looking for and some idea of where we're headed.